The Mongolian Revolution of 1921 ended direct Russian rule over Mongolia. However, the Mongol people were still not free from Russian domination, as the new communist government simply became a puppet state of the newly formed Soviet Union. Soviet dominance made many Mongolians second-class citizens in their own land and discouraged their traditional culture, religion, language, and arts. The communists attempted to force the Mongols, who were nomadic, to settle in towns and cities. The Mongols resisted these unnatural policies in order to preserve their historical way of life. Urbanization changed what is now known as Ulaanbaatar from a small settlement around the palace of the Bogdo Khan and the nearby Gandan monastery into a growing urban center with large office buildings and blocks of flats. In 1929, the Soviet Union adopted the policy of forcing Soviet peasant farmers into collectives in order to dismantle property ownership. The communist Mongolian government followed this policy with the first attempt at livestock collectivization beginning in 1930. This met great resistance from herders and led to a steep decline in livestock numbers from 24 million in 1930 to 16.2 million by 1932. Forced collectivization led to a sharp decrease in the number of cattle. A Chinese economic blockade led to a shortage of commodities, and neglecting social norms and failing to respect the aristocracy and Buddhist clergy led to a great general dissatisfaction with the new authorities. The first counter-reaction came from Western Mongolia. In March 1930, the Durbet rebelled with the slogans "Down with the confiscation" and "Down with the party," and other slogans such as "Protect religion and the nation." The rebels hid in monasteries, using them as shelters, and conducted anti-governmental military operations. However, shortly after this, they were defeated. Some rebels were shot and others were imprisoned. Despite the fact that the Durbet rebellion was completely suppressed, policymakers in Ulaanbaatar decided to monitor the region's political climate in the future. In April 1932, mass resistance erupted in rebellions in western provinces, such as Hovsgol, Arkhangai, Overthrow, and Zavkhan. Uprisings began in South Gobi and Altai provinces. Rebels robbed and destroyed cooperatives, and widespread violence caused the government to violently react, and they used extreme force to suppress the rebellion. About 8,000 to 10,000 rebels died. The government also suffered losses in excess of 400. For example, the Minister of Trade and Industry, G. Sodnom, was killed, along with other party and URY members. The battles ended only in October 1932. Moving on, religion in Mongolia also faced severe persecution. Mongolia's Buddhist establishment faced persecution. From 1932 onward, dire campaigns to destroy the monasteries themselves, to execute or imprison monks, and to redistribute monastic wealth and herds through collectivization began. The state expropriated much of the property, including land, artworks, and animals, from the Buddhist monasteries, and ordered the destruction of most of the monasteries and sanctioned the killing of monks. The purges of intellectuals, party members, military officers, and commoners, including herders, continued from 1933 until 1953, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 36,000 people who had been deemed anti-regime in one way or another. Mongolian intellectuals such as Shirnenjin Ayush, Sonom Baljirin Buyanemeku, and Mordendewin Idamsurung were executed during this communist purge. In the years that followed, anyone that attempted to revive Mongolian culture and nationalism was silenced. For example, the great Mongolian poet Ryanchini Choinom was silenced by communist propagandists and was jailed under the pretext of writing poems that neglected the so-called socialist achievements. Although hugely popular amongst the Mongolian people, he was not recognized by the state until after the communists were kicked out of Mongolia in 1990. In the 1980s, a new generation of Mongolian intellectuals who were educated in Europe began to emerge on the political scene. Intellectuals such as Dawadorjin Gunbold and Sanjasurenjin Zorig would lead Mongolia into a revolution that would finally end Russian domination over Mongolia. On December 10, 1989, a month after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Zorig led a group of 200 activists in a public protest demanding a free market economy and free elections. In January 1990, Zorig and his fellow Mongolian Democrat dissidents began staging weekend protests in Sukhbatar Square. This was the center of Ulaanbaatar. The protest started small but grew into large crowds as January passed into February. Separate groups of protesters began attacking symbols of Russian domination. For example, protesters went to the State Library on the night of February 22nd and dismantled a statue of Joseph Stalin. Calls for publication of historical texts and literature in Mongol script rather than in Cyrillic grew, and the usage of Mongol language rather than Russian language words increased. With continuous mass demonstrations and the organization of multiple political parties, peaceful democratic reforms took hold in Mongolia. The country held its first democratic elections in July 1990, preceding the democratic reforms in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union openly disapproved of such moves. In August 1990, the Soviet Union began cutting back on its trade and barter relations with Mongolia. The Soviets terminated their supply of gas and mining equipment to Mongolia and stopped buying Mongolian meat. Subsequently, the KGB established an embargo on Mongolian goods, therefore cutting the country off from all economic resources. A few months later, because of its own internal economic crisis, the Soviet Union terminated international aid and loans to all recipient countries. The democratic revolution of 1990 ended 70 years of Soviet domination in Mongolia.
Atı demir göttegin örnen sedikşedu